The past year had me riddled with anxiety, and only until recently did I find the dread-filled pit in my stomach become quenched by relief. It's a strangely blissful feeling, the feeling that one's little secret will remain that way until death. I'll be upfront about it, there's no point beating around the bush. I murdered my husband just over a year ago. We'd been hiking, when a quarrel led to something more spiteful, more vicious. It was raining heavily, and, as we neared a small cliff, wherein I had judged that a fall from it would certainly not kill anyone, I had pushed him. Yet, what I had failed to calculate was that he'd fall and hit his head on a rather sharp rock, killing him instantly. I was so frightened. I leapt down immediately, noticing how much blood had pooled beneath his crushed skull, splashing upwards at me with each pulsing raindrop that fell onto him, onto us. Like the blood was trying, and failing, to splatter back at me in retaliation for what I'd done. To mark me externally, in the same manner that guilt and fear had done internally. I did what any normal person would have done, and called the police and ambulance services, explaining everything that had happened bar a few crucial details. That my poor, dear husband had slipped from the torrential rain and lost his footing, tumbling backwards to his demise. It wasn't hard for the police to believe my tale. With no previous mentions of abuse, verbal or physical, they quickly accepted my story as fact, and the gushing words from my in-laws and his friends cemented it on the official report. It's funny, isn't it? The way that pervasive guilt makes crocodile tears flow with ease. It wasn't an unwelcome sight to see a bereaved spouse crying a fountain at their love's funeral. That's the point of marriage, till death us do part. But no one ever expects it to happen so soon, so early in the binding contract. We'd only been married for 2 years before I murdered him, and had been high school sweethearts long before that. The sympathetic hugs and pats that wrapped around condolences allowed me to crumble more, to feign pain in a fantastically authentic way. The performance of a lifetime. Till death us do part, and in death, he had parted from me, and the role of victim had been unceremoniously reversed. I was the victim now, the victim of purely unfortunate circumstances. The thing is, though, is that guilt is an incredibly difficult emotion to shake off. It wraps around you like shackled binds, covering your mouth and ears in a thick smoke that clouds your perceptions. And, as guilt takes its hold on you, it provides more leeway for its lover to sink its icy claws into your back as well. Paranoia. Following the funeral, paranoia engulfed me, followed me wherever I went, which was mostly just from the bedroom into the kitchen. I was terrified of being caught out in the lie, that any moment a policeman would come knocking at my door, having found the slightest beacon of truth cracked through my fabricated story. I had considered turning myself in many a time, but with each day that passed of me withholding information, the greater the consequence of my actions. Technically, what I'd done was more akin to manslaughter than murder. I hadn't planned on murdering him whatsoever, just spooking him a bit. I hadn't premeditated it either. What I feared more, however, was that the care and sympathy that etched my loved ones' faces throughout the whole ordeal would be replaced with disgust, horror and anger substituting pity. I'll admit that I liked it a lot. The feeling of being cared for so much. Like I was a mere baby, cradled by words of assurance and love. Little encouragements that made my life so much easier. It was a free pass from any mistakes. Work became less heavy, and permission to engage in alcoholic indulgences more often than was healthy was also prevalent. It was a high I'd never felt before, the feeling of being excused from the mundane normalcy that everyone else had to trudge through. I suppose you could call it something akin to Munchausen syndrome, without the need to actively self-induce illness to garner the attention I so desperately needed. My dead husband had done that all for me. I was finally free from the shackles of societal expectations, and slowly but surely, I was able to overwhelm the guilt and paranoia that had once overwhelmed me. I had won, and gained nothing but the benefits of it all. That was, until a week ago. Sitting on my sofa, whilst languidly sipping red wine, the lock to my door began to jostle, as if someone had a key to unlock it. My mind went straight to my mother-in-law, who had a spare set made in order for her to come and hand me a freshly made casserole. She'd done nothing but coddle me since her son's death, and I had to quickly hide my gleeful grin with a more sorrowful expression. Standing up and hiding my drink, I walked into the hallway to greet her. Except it wasn't her, it was my husband. I shrieked in fear, the feeling of bile threatening to unleash blood-red spew from my mouth. He was there, in his suit, smiling at me with blinding teeth that could have melted the hearts of any spouse desperately wanting to be reunited with their other half. Could have, should have. But for me, I felt nothing but abject horror. Oops. Sorry, honey, didn't mean to frighten you. He smiled sympathetically as he took off his suit jacket and hung it on the coat rack. He waltzed towards my rigid frame and enveloped me in a strong hug. He was warm and his breath hot. He was real, his flesh wasn't that of a reanimated corpse. He was alive. My ear that was pressed against his chest could hear the low thumping of his heart pumping blood. I could barely speak. I pushed away and ran to the bathroom, hurling muddied and reddish vomit into the porcelain basin. He shot in behind me, holding my hair up as to not get it sodden. "Oh God, honey. Are you all right?" he asked, love and care dripping from his words. I simply continued to vomit. "Shall I get you some water?" he'd asked, and before I could respond, he'd already gone and fetched a glass. He held it to my lips, and the cold fluid cooled the acidic burn in my throat. How are you, Dash?" I'd finally managed to mutter out, my tongue croaked. I know. He sweetened, rubbing soft circles on the small of my back. "I was swamped at work today, but at least I'm getting paid overtime. Boss said I'm due for a promotion soon. I was thinking maybe we could go on a nice weekend getaway, or Dash." I'd interrupted him. "You're dead. You died," and I felt my breath grow louder, raspier, and I knew a panic attack was fast approaching. The clamminess in my hands and on my temples told me just as much. "Oh, did you have a nightmare?" "It's okay, shush," he started, picking me up off the bathroom floor and ushering me back into the living room, setting me down on the sofa, whilst whispering sweet nothings in my ear. I never would have thought that such honey-ridden words would bring such wasp-like stings to my psyche. "It's just a nightmare, sweetheart. I'm here now, it's all right." I don't think we stayed up for much longer after that. I silently tiptoed around him, nervously trying to gauge if I was having some intense hallucination. That my paranoia hadn't really left and was punishing me for being so complacent in the past few months. I remember being unable to sleep that first night, his shallow breathing jerking me back to reality. I'd wriggled out of his grasp when he slept, as though his warm touch scolded me with each lingering moment. The next morning he disappeared, and for a moment I'd felt relief. Relief that maybe I wasn't insane. Yet the indent of his pillow brought me back into a state of shock and told me I wasn't truly absolved of his presence. He was downstairs in the kitchen, making breakfast, the humming that left his lips swirling into the music that emanated from the radio. "Pancakes? I thought you might need them this morning." He beamed, his shirtless, muscular frame hidden only by an apron adorned with flour. To any other love-struck wife, this would be a dream, a perfect achievement that life was bliss. To me, it was unfurling rapidly into a nightmare. Did he know? Did he remember what I'd done? Had I dreamt the whole past year up? Had I been stuck in a sick fantasy that made me crave his disappearance? "I'm not hungry," I stated, more spitefully than I'd intended. Like a wounded puppy, he frowned, before rushing over and placing the meat of his palm against my forehead. It was still warm. Still real. "Are you still sick from yesterday?" He worried, and it took every muscle in my body to prevent myself from slapping his hand away. Finally, he released me. "You don't look very well. I mean, you look fantastic, as you always do, just a tad under the weather." He kissed my cheek, and the wetness from his lips sent ice shivers down my spine. "Shall I call your work? Tell them you don't feel well?" he asked, and I nodded rigidly. He smiled warmly once more. "Okay, you go off to bed. I don't want you dying on me." I remember how gut-wrenching that last sentence was. For a moment, I thought I saw a darkly humorous gleam in his eyes, like he'd caught me in a trap. Like he was toying with me. I turned on my heel and ran back up the stairs, slamming the bedroom door behind me. I remember how I paced around the room, biting at the skin around my nails until they became sore and pink. A knock on the bedroom door made me shoot into the bed, pulling the covers over my head and pretending to be fast asleep. He'd come in, and the weight beside me on the bed told me he was close, and growing ever closer to my exposed ear. "Honey?" he inquired, in that sickly sweet voice that I'd long since forgotten until the past few hours. A finger brushed the hair by my ear, lovingly I assumed, but all I'd felt was lingering torment. He must have thought I'd truly managed to fall asleep that quickly. A dark chuckle left his lips, before excited squeals racked his chest. Like a child who'd been allowed an ice cream for behaving well. I was so focused on keeping my body still, on the thudding of my heart, that I hadn't realized his mouth being mere inches from my ear. "Till death us do part." Then he'd left. I waited there for what must have been an hour, frozen in place. He did know. He knew exactly what I had done, and he was toying with me. This was my judgment day. After I'd decided enough time had passed, I gingerly left my bedroom, tiptoeing around and noticing that his car had gone. The kitchen was spotless, so he must have cleaned up. My perfect, undead husband had left for work. I went on Facebook. No messages left with condolences from his friends. In fact, the entire post I'd made about the passing of the love of my life had completely disappeared without a trace. All the photos of family events that had me looking solemn and shy were now replaced with almost exact replicas, except for the smiling face of my dead husband peering at the camera next to me, his large hand clamped around my waist or shoulder. As if he'd never died. I couldn't stand it. Everything I gained, everything I'd worked so hard for, was so cruelly ripped from me. It was like I'd died. I was no longer the poor, grief-stricken wife. I was the happiest and luckiest woman in the world. It destroyed me from the inside out. I needed it, the sympathy, the victimhood. I craved it, stronger than ever before. This must be what opioid addicts feel like, when the euphoria is so suddenly stripped from them. The cold shaking of my fingertips felt just as much like withdrawals. So, I decided to kill my husband again. This time, make sure he was really never going to come back, never ruin my life again. I went out for a drive and bought some sleeping pills. Lots. Just over-the-counter stuff, but strong ones nonetheless. A few bottles, on being his favorite wine, and a couple of steaks to make his favorite meal. I'm not that much of a villain, you know. I'm kind enough to at least send him out with one last hurrah. I slaved away in the kitchen, making sure that the steak dinner was piping hot and ready to be consumed once he'd walked through the door. I'd even lit some candles as well, and dressed up nicely, putting on makeup in the exact way he liked it. I practiced in the mirror, the bashful looks and fluttering of lashes that were just coy enough to give him the implication that I was going to give him, my dear husband, everything he deserved. He arrived home and picked me up with glee at the sight of what I had prepared, swinging me around and peppering kisses all over my neck. The girlish giggles I'd forced out of my chest were truly convincing, if I do say so myself, and we sat down in the living room, ready to eat. "I hope you like it," I said softly, a $1,000,000 smile stretched over my face. How could I not? "This is perfect, you are perfect," he lovingly gushed, cutting a piece of meat and placing it in his mouth. He moaned in pleasure. "Simply divine. You really should become a chef, write a cookbook." I giggled once again, ignoring the nagging disdain that threatened to furrow my brow. "Oh, I forgot," I said, clasping my hands together in the most adorable way I could muster. "Would you like a glass of wine? I bought your favorite, Albarino." It seemed impossible that his grin could grow any wider, but it did. "Wow! Yes, please." With that, I sauntered off to the kitchen, swaying my hips seductively as I left. Men are such fickle creatures, and hopefully any remaining doubts in his mind would soon be overridden with lustful thoughts. From the living room I could hear him muttering to himself, words along the lines of, "What did I do to deserve her?" and the like. I was ever so fortunate that my husband was a white wine drinker, and me a red, so bringing in 2 distinct glasses would be of no alarm to him. I'd already opened the bottle of Albarino hours before he arrived, filling the bottle with packet after packet of crushed sleeping pills, which had allowed enough time for them to fully dissolve into the pale liquid. I emerged back into the living room, placing his glass of wine in front of him whilst taking a sip from my own, and kissed him on his cheek. A small blush arose from him, and he gleamed with mirth. We continued to chat over dinner. A few seductive glances passed between us, before he swayed slightly and fell asleep in his chair. I checked his pulse. It was still there. Slowly, his body crumpled onto the floor, the deep slumber rendering his muscles useless. Here was the tricky part. I could have left him there, to inevitably choke on his own tongue or vomit, which wasn't entirely out of the question seeing as I'd put enough sleeping pills in the wine to kill a horse, but seeing his strong frame lay on the ground made me question if it was enough to kill him. If he'd survived, that would mean the money I'd wasted on this whole ordeal was worthless. Not to mention another day of agonizing withdrawals from the ultimate pleasure of being pitted. So, I changed out my outfit and put on plain black clothing with the washing up gloves on for good measure. Luckily, I still had a stash of COVID masks left over from the pandemic, and after placing one over my mouth and nose, along with a shower cap to prevent any hair from falling onto him, I got a hammer out of my husband's toolbox and stood over him. I had a few practice takes, swinging the hammer in the air to see what method would cause the most damage. Then, I got to work. I felt bad for him, of course. Sleeping there blissfully like a baby. But, like any addict, I would do anything to get my fix, so I smashed his skull until his entire forehead caved in. It surprised me how little force was needed to really get in there, near his brain. It was child's play, and rather therapeutic. With each splatter and squelch I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders, and, though I hate to admit it because I'm not really a psychopathic maniac, it was so unimaginably pleasurable. I was no longer forcing the giggles out, they racked my body uncontrollably. I cleaned up, satisfied that my work was complete, and dragged his body into the bathroom and placed him into the bath, allowing the shower head to help bleed him out. I checked Facebook once more, and everything was back to normal. The family photos, the post I'd made about his demise, and the messages from his friends were all back to the way they were, the way they should be. That night I slept so soundly, knowing that my once again dead husband was in the bathroom downstairs. But the next morning he was there, in bed with me, again. The feeling of his chest against my back, his arms wrapped around my body. Warm, alive, just like nothing had happened. I sobbed so much. Once again, the desperate relief I desired was ripped so cruelly from my grasp. Venom laced my veins, and I turned to look at him, his eyes blinking from waking up. Morning. He smiled, kissing my forehead. I squirmed. What's wrong? I shot up out of bed, gasping for breath. How could he do this to me? How could he claim he loved me when he denied me such needed pleasures? Oh dear, are you upset about last night? He questioned, his eyes holding that taunting glint in them once again. I refrained from answering. I really didn't appreciate that, you know? To think you'd be so naive to try and get rid of me again. He chuckled, before getting out of bed to approach me. It doesn't matter though, I don't mind it. You shouldn't try it again though, you don't know how hard I've tried to make this work. He nestled his head into the crook of my neck. He knew what he was doing, playing with me, hurting me. What the fuck do you want? I spat out, pushing him away. He wasn't startled at all, he just kept smiling sleepily at me, like I was the cutest thing on the planet. It made me sick. I just told you. I want to make this work. He repeated, scoffing like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I suppose it's time to come clean now. The argument we had the first time that I'd killed him was because I had wanted a divorce. I was feeling trapped, like I hadn't lived my life properly, fully. I'd been with my husband since I could remember, as childhood friends, to dating as teens, to married as young adults. As my friends went out to party, to have fun, to fulfill fickle desires with one-night stands and toxic shags, I was working to provide for a life that I'd never known otherwise. He, of course, never wanted to leave me. That's why I pushed him away, to his untimely demise. Till death us do part, remember? He kissed my hand, rubbing his cheek against it lovingly. I snatched it away, and slapped him with the other. He didn't seem fazed at all, just continued to look at me with an enamored expression until I'd left the bedroom. Throughout the past week, I murdered my husband more times than I could count. I drowned him, electrocuted him, poisoned and suffocated him. I set him alight, I beat him to death. I even stabbed him right in the neck. But every time I killed him, he came right back, as loving as ever. He never fought back when I murdered him. He stared at me blissfully, even when I poured gasoline over his head or lowered the hairdryer into the bath. He just sighed with slight annoyance, but shrugged it off, chuckling at my failures, my incompetency. It drove me mad, but I had noticed my thirst for pity, for attention from grieving family members and friends, had begun to diminish. I no longer craved seeing the messages pop up on my Facebook, offering condolences and such. Instead, I craved the feeling of getting rid of him. Tonight, I'd sat down and had a conversation with him, one which finally opened my eyes. He'd cuddled up to me on the sofa as we watched some terrible telenovela rerun, and I'd simply let him shower me in affection. I'd given up on trying to push him away. "Why won't you die?" I asked, tiredly. He simply chuckled. "I thought we'd been over this, sweetheart. Till death us do part." He kissed my cheek, curling his fingers in my hair. "So why won't you part? You've died multiple times by now, and you still keep coming back." He sighed, shaking his head. That same, sickeningly sweet smile plastered on his face, as unwavering as usual. "It seems you didn't take our vows seriously." He kissed again. "It's not till death I do part. It's us do part." I poured my heart and soul into those vows, which is why I'm still here. I'm here until we both go. He sighed longingly into my neck. "You should count it as a blessing, really. You can hurt me all you want, and I'm still going to be right here, by your side." So, Reddit. Think of this as my final confession, my plea for forgiveness. Forgive me, for I have sinned, but at least I will be here no more. My husband is sleeping soundly next to me as I write this, his fingertips clasped around my waist. He has no idea that I had left his car running all night. No idea about the hose I attached to the exhaust pipe that leads into our room from the window, strapped to my mouth with tape. He has no idea that I took his words so literally. That he'd been so unaware of the lengths I'd go to squash his existence for the final time, even at the expense of my own. He's right. Till death us do part. So, it's my turn to depart. I hope this reaches the right audience. I need people to understand that my security job is not like any you have heard of before. I am currently in the break room as I write this during my 4th week on the job. I thought I was signing up for a work-from-home role, but it turned out to be work from hell. You're probably wondering why I'm still here giving my predicament, and if you thought it was just for the money, you would be correct. Money was what brought me here, but as I tell you my story, you will come to learn that there are ways to keep someone under your control. I haven't had so much disposable income in my life, but some things money can't buy. I hear the screams of a colleague from the med room as his eyes and face melt from the acidic saliva he came in contact with out on duty. With the dangers of the job and the otherworldly working conditions, I feel like I have some stories that will help you think twice before chasing dollar signs. Just be aware, these may stop at any time due to my untimely demise. My name is Thomas. I have been known as Tommy for as long as I can remember. I had the usual childhood in my hometown. 2 hard-working parents who provided what they could while I took everything for granted. I coasted through school and was lucky to get out without repeating too many classes. I spent some time in the Army once I left high school. Went through basic training, was never top of any class, but I got by. I had some great instructors, who pushed me further than anything I have ever done before. I enjoyed my time there and the people in my company were supportive, but on my second tour things went wild. For the purpose of the story, we will leave it with an honorary discharge with a recommendation to spend some time getting some therapy and a slow reintegration to society. The things I saw over there would change a man. Once I could gather my thoughts into some form of coherence, I decided I was going to live the American dream, and I started my own construction business. I was going to subcontract the work and retire by 45. That failed miserably. I spent the next few years just existing, doing odd security jobs here and there. Working the door at nightclubs on the weekend. Not the existence I had imagined for myself. One busy weekend in the middle of July, I was working the door of a nightclub called Club Rouge. An extremely disturbing place, but that's a story for another day. Tony was on with me that night, a big burly man from Australia. He had shoulders like bowling balls and a nose that had met too many solid objects. He said he played rugby back home, although the scars on his face had more resemblance to knife wounds. We were doing our usual routine as instructed by the owners, keeping the ratio of 2 women to 1 man, but young brunettes were giving priority. Like I said, that place had bad intentions. Did I tell you about the ad on the radio I heard the other night going home? Tony asked. This new place is looking for security guards to work remotely. Pay sounded too good to be true though. It always is, I laughed. That's how they lure you in. You're probably right, but have a listen on your way home. What could be worse than working these doors? Tony grinned. After our shift finished, I headed to my car to start my commute. The roads at this time of night were always quiet. I needed something to keep my mind focused, so I turned on the radio. I usually listen to some podcasts, but Tony had sparked my curiosity. The station came to life as the late-night DJ was closing out the last song. That was our first local submission of the week, a young band called Parmesan Wasps. I'll be back after this short break, and then we are straight into the weekly dilemma. I have been ghosted by the last 5 girls I met at the club. Is it me, or is there something else going on? I don't know about you folks, but I think the texter might need to take a look in the mirror. The ads came on, the usual for this time of night. Keith Stevenson, divorce attorney. Getting itchy feet, call Keith. Wild West builders. We might be cowboys, but we build it to code. These continued in the same vein until a professional voice announced. Divinity Incorporated, we fuel the future. Remote security jobs available with a controlled audience. Majority of the role consists of WFH. Please call in to attend your induction day at Divinity Inc. Minimum pay of $500 per Earth day worked. I could tell why this caught Tony's attention. The role sounded perfect. I expected to be watching some warehouses on my laptop and making easy money. The term Earth days threw me off a little, but the language the kids use these days was something I couldn't keep up with. I decided as I rounded the corner to my house that I would stop by in the morning and see if they have anything for me. Your destination is on the left, the sat-nav called out. I turned down the lane towards the brilliant white building. The lane was shrouded by trees. Beautiful autumnal leaves scattered the ground. I already had a good feeling about this place. As I approached the car park, it struck me with how many people were working here. There were hundreds of cars, and I had never heard of Divinity Incorporated before. I parked and made my way across to the entrance. The building seemed to glisten in the low rising sun. The steps up the entrance looked like marble. The double doors opened by sensor as I approached and entered. The reception area was a vast room with high ceilings. Glass bowl lights hung down to illuminate the floor. There was a long reception desk to the left of the entrance. Behind was a wood-paneled wall accentuated with pictures of smiling people in suits. A voice called out from the reception desk. Welcome to Divinity Inc. Are you here for the induction day? The voice came from a beautiful brunette barely visible behind the giant desk. I am. I managed to stutter out. She grinned. My name's Annie. It's nice to meet you. She paused, waiting for me to introduce myself. Tommy. I managed. That Irish accent had caught me off guard along with her striking appearance. Man, a few words, Tommy, she laughed. I'll need you to sign this before you head in. Nothing major, just a quick non-disclosure agreement. We deal with private documents, and data protection is a big thing nowadays. I knew I had to pull this back. I had come across as a stuttering buffoon. I put on my best smile and signed the page as I looked her in the eyes. You'd definitely make it easier to come into work every day, I said as I attempted a laid-back approach of leaning against the desk. She smiled at me with flirtatious eyes until she noticed I had finished signing the page. She grabbed the sheet and filed it away in the drawer with one precise movement. Only then I realized I didn't even read it. "This way, please," she said with her back to me, already heading down the hall. She led me through a maze of corridors. Each door showed offices full of people monitoring screens with great intent. I couldn't see what the few closest to the doors were watching, but they were all as focused. We went down a set of stairs and into a large circular room. The wall of the room was littered with outlines of doors, each one with a bronze placard above the outline. I could read the closest two on my left. One said City Suburbs, the other said Waste Drill Site 3. In the middle of the room there was a huge double-sided screen that displayed what looked like a task board like that you would find in any call center. The top task said, "Look for the Paladin, Town Hall, 5 hours, £15,000 and 40k bonus if found." The bottom of the list had 10 or so duplicates of Shift Security Waste Drill Site 2, $500, 5 hours. Below the screen was what you'd expect to see in a secret armory of a hero in the movies. Racks of rifles, rows of shotguns, handguns of all makes and blades of all lengths. A broad man with a stiff posture stood beside the armor. He had the air of a military general. A stiff iron collar and spit-shined boots. His black hair, flecked with gray, gave him the appearance of a man who has seen many seasons. "Good morning, Mr. Armstrong," Annie called out as we approached. Mr. Armstrong was the main guy here at Divinity Incorporated. He extended his hand and shook mine with one powerful shake that nearly put my shoulder out of my socket. "Gerald," he said as I mentally assessed the damage to my unsuspecting joints. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Tommy," he said, giving me a once-over. I realized I hadn't told him my name yet, but let the thought slide. "It's nice to meet you too," I replied, trying my best to put on a professional front to my potential employer. We had the usual formalities of a job interview. I told him about my previous experience in security and time in the military. He was interested in my combat experience, which, judging by the arsenal behind us, wasn't too much of a surprise. "I'm going to give it to you straight, Tommy. This job isn't your usual security role. These gateways here lead to hell," he said as casually as if he was discussing the weather. He went on to describe how scientists were accelerating particles in the Large Hadron Collider, and a miscalculation led to a gateway being opened to hell. Hadron emitted linear location. He described how they'd been traveling here for the best part of 5 years, building research sites across the explored regions of this place where they can extract resources and data. However, all this research needs to be funded, he said, gesturing to the monitors. "We have a very exclusive client base who pay very generously to watch the daily shift. We have body cams, which live stream from each person in hell." "So what's that about the Paladin?" I asked, unsure how I was taking this conversation serious. "Those are tasks you can elect to follow to earn some additional income. A little too risky for a rookie of the company," he said. I later found out the Paladin is a religious fanatic who entered hell to preach the gospel to the non-believers, as he calls them. He jumped with a Bible in one hand and a 12-gauge in the other. He took off his camera as soon as he got through and hasn't returned topside since. The ever-watching eyes are obsessed with his crusade across the land of the damned and pay handsomely for any content including him. "Look, I appreciate you taking the time to see me today, but this all sounds a bit crazy," I said. As I turned to leave, Gerald announced that I wouldn't be going anywhere in a hurry. When I questioned him on this, he informed me that the cute little receptionist is a qualified psychiatric doctor and I had signed a form to admit myself into her care for my own safety. It's always the short ones. I cursed as I realized this man wasn't going to let me go spilling the beans on their operation. "It's best if you just get your induction started," he said as he pressed a button on a keyboard which burst one of the outlines on the wall to life. "I'd grab something from the rack if I were you." As I stepped through, the gateway shapes began to materialize in front of me. I could see 2 men standing over some maps spread out along a wooden desk. The edges were held down by a stapler and a handgun. Bullets were lying loose along the map. One of the men was pointing towards a spot with several red X's in close proximity. I cleared my throat to let them know I was there. "Do you think I'm fucking blind, rookie?" the man on the right yelled. "No, sir," I snapped. His tone brought me straight back to my days in service. This balding, scrawny man who was barely 5'6" on his toes had the air of authority that demanded respect. "Do you see me cutting fucking ribbons or kissing babies on the forehead? I earn a living just as much as the next guy. You can call me Mark." Mark taunted. He gave a slight grin towards the others. Mark was a decent guy once you got to know him, bit rough around the edges. He introduced me to the guys I would be working with. They went by Roscoe, a tall man with a buzz cut that made him look quite formidable, Ian, a young man who looked fresh out of high school, and Evan. He had a warm smile which was a contrast to his features. He had burned scars to the left side of his face down to his hands. His skin looked tender and sore. "Nice to meet you, rookie," Evan said as he shook my hand. "If you make it through the job until the next guy comes along, you can let us know your real name." I laughed, but deep down I knew he wasn't joking. Our tour of the building was same as any workspace walkthrough. They showed me the workspace, kitchen, bathrooms, and where the extra supplies were for the security staff. Once we went outside, that's where everything changed. The scenery was indescribable. "Welcome to hell," Roscoe announced. We stepped out through the doors of the watchtower which overlooked the research labs. The landscape was barren other than our compound. The area we were located in looked like a desert of burnt red sand. The skyline looked to be ablaze, and an ominous wind swept across the vast open space. I noticed an obelisk-like structure 200 feet from the main gate. "What's that?" I asked, pointing in the direction of the misshapen structure. "Transport stones," Ian said. "There's hundreds of them spread across this place. They can open portals for the natives to travel through. Only stay active for a short time, so only a handful of the locals can make a break on us." "Why don't we just destroy it then?" I asked, unnerved. I hoped they didn't hear the tremble in my voice. Mark put his hand on my shoulder a bit too forcefully. "We know exactly where they will come from. Besides, if we close their portals, that will just bring the attention of the generals on us, and you really don't want to have a run-in with one of them. Not too many can say they came across a general and made it back topside," Mark informed me. I spent the first half of my shift with Evan. He introduced me to the workers on site and told me some of the history of this location. Waste Drill Site 3 was founded 6 months ago. They are currently excavating minerals and a form of energy which is 10 times more powerful than the fossil fuels on Earth. He also told me more about the people watching our shifts. Most important thing is to keep away from any bodily fluid from the locals. It can infect you and turn you into one of them, Evan said. He poured me a cup of coffee from the pot he had freshly brewed. "It's an infection we call the rot. Those that fully transform are called remnants. Tough sons of bitches. If any of us perish out there, you toss one of these on us," he continued. He passed me a small container which he told me would light a body up real good. Apparently the rot could be treated, but the medicine was extremely expensive. Employees of the company got it for a fraction of the price. The infected skin and bones would melt and fuse together in a demonic form. They gained extreme strength and powers still vastly unknown. They seemed to have a high standing in the local population, and there were often task forces sent to take out any that didn't get burned before they turned. As I began to ask Evan more about the remnants, the room erupted in a blaring of sirens. A voice announced over the intercom of a level 2 tree with potential to breach. The team rushed out to the watchtower as I followed behind. I'm not ashamed to admit it here, but the terror was building inside of me. As I looked out at the fragment of reality that had split not 200 feet in front of me, I felt my blood turn cold. The world seemed to quiver as an impossible large ape-like creature with sharp-pointed spikes protruding from obtuse angles marched towards our electrified gate. Demonic-looking humanoids encircled it like an unholy procession of carnage. "Look alive, rookie, we have a date with the devil," Mark roared over the commotion. The enormous monstrosity reached the gate and barreled into it. It crumpled under his weight, but the extreme voltage flowing through its body made it blister and smoke. "Heads down," someone shouted from behind. I couldn't move. These things were about to get in, and I couldn't move any fiber of my body. The giant creature exploded, sending the spikes hurling in all directions. One exploded through the wall to my left and struck a worker in the gut. His entrails leaked out around the edges of the spike and his skin started to bubble and turn a sickly gray. His screams engulfed my thoughts and the darkness overtook me. I woke up to Mark standing over me as I lay in a bed in the staff living quarters. He looked battered and bruised but very much alive. "Take it easy, rookie. You have had a lot to process on your first day." I sat up in the bed and noticed I didn't have any clothes on. "What happened to my clothes?" I asked, very much aware that someone had removed them when I passed out. "You pissed yourself, rookie. We couldn't leave you marinating in it." "Don't worry, it's like a rite of passage for us here at Divinity Inc. Get dressed and head home. You had an eventful first day," he said with a smile. As I tried to get up from the bed, I noticed a sharp pain piercing my side. As I looked to the source of the pain, I noticed a patch of my skin was gray and withered. Mark noticed the panic on my face. "Not to worry, the rot won't kill you." "Well, not as long as you keep coming back to work," he said with a devilish grin. "If you meditate by yourself, never close your eyes." When I left my office on a cold, sunny Friday in February, I never could have imagined what awaited me at home. I put on my coat, threw my purse over my shoulder and approached the exit, saying bye to my colleagues on the way out. My heels clicked on the fake hardwood floors as I left, but I was stopped as I reached the door. "Oh, you, heading out, Sophie?" a familiar, tentative voice said. I silently groaned. "Yeah, it's 5 p.m. I said flatly, looking at my watch. I looked over at the timid figure who represented my final barrier to weekend freedom. Jim meant well, but clearly had a crush on me, despite being 20 years my senior. He was infamous among the women in the office for having a wandering stare that bordered on inappropriate, but he was harmless. He now stood before me, awkwardly scratching the back of his neck and wincing at his own words. "Could I, grab us, or, you, a drink?" "With me?" he choked out, barely hanging on. "No thanks, Jim. See you Monday." I hurried off. We had this exact exchange dozens of times, and I had no reservations about brushing him off. He'd flirted with some of the other women but was more persistent with me. I let out a sigh of relief as I exited the building. As always, I took a side street because it was quieter and bordered the woods, and I loved the smell of the trees and the sounds of the forest. I had just started thinking about what I'd have for dinner when I heard a twig snap about 15 feet into the tree line. I stopped abruptly, squinting into the trees. There wasn't much light during February afternoons, and I struggled to see anything as I looked between the tree trunks. The forest was still, like I had caught it red-handed. "Hello?" I called out, my mind immediately suspecting a serial killer, kidnapper, or a bear. Unsurprisingly, I received no answer, and I continued my walk home. I reached my front porch and slipped the key into the door. As I turned it, I felt no resistance. Holy shit, did I leave the door unlocked? I do that all the time and thought nothing of it, except that I'd make a terrible mother. I walked inside, threw off my outside clothes, and slipped into the rattiest, oversized black t-shirt I could find. It was a relic from high school that had stood the test of time. I walked to the bathroom, leaving the door open behind me, and started washing my face. Thump. I froze. I was using face cleanser, and if I opened my eyes, it would hurt like a bitch. I panicked and fumbled around, arms outstretched, looking for the door. Fuck, I thought. Just before I finally reached it, I felt an unfamiliar fabric graze my fingers. Was that my towel? I slammed the door shut, exhaled, and quickly rinsed my face. There was no towel hanging on the door. I did a quick sweep of the house and unsurprisingly found nothing notable. The noise was probably just the house settling into place. What does that even mean? I was starving and immediately pushed my concerns away so I could start chopping onions. As I reached for my go-to-cutting knife, I noticed it was missing. I checked the sink and the dishwasher, both of which yielded no results. I'll figure it out after dinner, I thought. While cutting the onions, I managed to stop only twice to cry. While I was waiting for my water to boil, I decided to listen to a quick meditation. I slipped my earphones in. I sat cross-legged in the middle of my living room, ready to take in a guided meditation. I saw an email notification from YouTube advertising one called Guided Meditation for Relaxing by Yourself at Home. I had unsubscribed from YouTube marketing emails, but this one got through. It seemed legit. I clicked on the video, which had literally 0 views. I had never seen this channel, which also had 0 subscribers, but decided to take a chance on it. I closed my eyes and absorbed myself into the meditation. A somewhat familiar male voice came on, but I didn't pursue the association. And get nice and comfortable as you focus only on my voice and your breath. In deeply, out, for just a little longer than you breathe in, and as you feel your thoughts disappear, ask yourself why the door was unlocked. My eyes shot open. What the fuck? I shouted aloud, looking around the living room. There's no way I heard that right. I closed all the curtains, flipped the lights on, locked the doors and windows, and checked on my pot of water before going back to the living room. Tentatively, I picked up my phone and looked at the video. The channel had a blank description and had only posted 1 video. My heart pounding, I went back to the video to listen again. Really feel each part of your body. Observe and scan your body for sensation, your toes, ankles, knees. The video droned on, completely normal. I was thoroughly confused. Obviously, I needed to take some more PTO. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a healthy serving of wine, and returned to my meditation. Moving up to your hands, ask yourself when you last paid attention to your hands. Rub your thumb against your index finger, then your middle finger, ring finger, then your pinky, and ask yourself, how would you get on if I cut each of those fingers off? For the second time, I opened my eyes wildly and threw myself to my feet. I checked the video. This is either some fucked up genre I know nothing about, or my thoughts were interrupted by a sinking realization. The channel icon was surrounded in red, meaning the meditation I was watching was a live stream. With shaking fingers, I put an earphone back in, completely terrorized at this point. And as this meditation comes to a close, reflect on past relationships. Is there someone in your life you're neglecting? Are you being an ungrateful fucking bitch who can't see that what she needs is right in front of her? My whole body started trembling as my vision swam and the lights shut off. Thump, 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 thump. I screamed as footsteps closed in on me. The intruder was in the room with me, brandishing my knife. I threw myself to the left to avoid his path. As he turned towards me, I scrambled to my feet and ran into the kitchen. I looked around for something, anything, as I heard him clamber towards the kitchen entrance. You were everything to me. Jim screamed in a horrifying voice. If you just looked and seen what we could have had, I wouldn't have had to do this. Why do I always do this? He yelled, the final sentence coming out in a quiet, strained voice, and more as a question to himself. As he emerged from the darkness of the living room into the kitchen light, I used the only weapon I had. Where are you? He let out before I doused him in the boiling water. He let out an agonized scream as steaming liquid struck him in the face, which he clutched in despair. As he lay on the floor, I ran upstairs, clutching my phone and frantically dialing 911. If you meditate by yourself, never close your eyes, and be wary of seemingly harmless people. Kyung was the one who brought it up during one of our many late-night chats. I had a run of shit luck on my previous shift, he grumbled as he lit a cigarette with his lighter. Some pretty girl flagged my taxi down along Jalan Besar after midnight, and just as I thought that I could earn back my fuel money with the fare, she just straight up vanished in the middle of the ride. Chewing on a mouthful of nasi lemak, I swallowed and took a sip out of my coffee. Vanished? What do you mean? Exactly what I said. He put the cigarette in between his teeth, but did not puff it immediately. I stopped at a red light, and then I heard the rear passenger door lock click open. By the time I turned my head around to glance behind me, the bitch had gone poof like magic. So, she's a fare evader, I said with a wry laugh. Not common, but it's not like they don't exist either. Why didn't you chase her down or call the police? Are you even listening? I told you, she just straight up disappeared, Kyung insisted. I swear I only stopped the car for 3 seconds at most. But when I checked my surroundings, it was completely empty. I was the only person in the entire intersection, you know. I was going to crack a joke, but I knew Keong long enough to know that he wasn't the type of man to embellish his tales with such dubious claims unless he was going insane. Are you sure that you didn't see her running off somewhere? I asked. Have you checked your dash cam? He suddenly paused and slammed his hand against the table in a gesture. That's right, the dash cam. Only a smart one like you will definitely come up with such an ingenious solution. That's just common sense. Drinking the remaining coffee in my cup, I scraped the last bits of rice on the oil paper into my mouth and tossed the wrapper into the bin. Come on, let's go to your car. Huh? What for? The dash cam, have you forgotten? I sighed. You should be thankful that I helped you install one last month, or else you'd really be shit out of luck in this case. This kind of thing, only youngsters will know how to operate them anyway, he quipped as we walked to his taxi. My generation where got such thing one. Just turn the key in the ignition, press clutch and shift gear only. As Keong rambled on in between drags on his cigarette, I fiddled around with the dash cam until I managed to pull up the most recent footage on the tiny screen. What time did it happen? I asked, pressing the button to fast forward the video. Around 12:15, 12:20 in the morning? It happened soon after I picked her up, I think. So, it should be recorded in this part, then. I clicked the play button, and with Keong leaning over the window to peek at the dashcam screen, we watched the footage play out. A road lined with parked cars and shop houses, lit only by the occasional yellow glow of streetlights. At the next intersection, there was a figure waving an outstretched hand slowly towards the approaching taxi. There, that's her, Keong remarked. Let's see what happens next. Miss, where to? ZZZT, Maras. I frowned. What is with the static noise? Rozak already? Keong suggested. I bought it brand new, no way it'll be broken this fast. I paused the video. Where did she want to go, anyway? Jalan Cameras, he said calmly. What, you mean the cemetery? In the dead of night? I gave him an incredulous look. You're brave for picking up such a passenger in the first place. Qingming, Tomb Sweeping Day, is coming soon, so it is not surprising for people to go to the cemetery to tend to their family graves, he pointed out. Besides, I wear an amulet around my neck all the time, so no evil can ever harm me. Shaking my head, I resumed the video. The sound of the accelerator being pressed, accompanied by the faint cackle of static that wasn't present before. Are you doing prayers for your ancestors, miss? A burst of static cut off her reply. Silence for the next couple of seconds. Then, the sound of the blinker as the taxi approached an empty intersection. Can you G, straight? But miss, we'll reach Jalan Cameras faster if we take the road to the left. Go STR, GHT. The sound of the blinker stopped just as the light turned red. The taxi rolled to a stop. By the way, miss, are you going alone? That's a little dangerous, especially when the area isn't well lit. You should at least wear an amulet to protect yourself, like me. Suddenly, a click sounded as the door lock was released. Miss? What are you? The sound of a door being frantically opened. Miss, where did you go? See, do you believe me now? Keong asked, pointing at the screen. There's only wilderness at that junction. Where can a person run to? I pursed my lips in thought. If you had gone straight all the way, wouldn't you have gone onto the highway? He shrugged. I'm charging by the meter anyway, so it doesn't matter as long as the fare is paid at the end. But I'm telling you, this passenger makes my blood boil. Young people like her think that we old taxi drivers are fools that can be. Thankfully, I managed to stop Keong before he embarked on another tirade. She seems to know this area well. There is a good chance that she's a local. I'm sure that soon enough, either you or I will meet her while on the job. We can confront her together if that happens. I can't argue with that logic. That's a deal then. Keong patted me on my back and pulled the door open. Now, will you please get out so that I can start my shift? Hey, I'm also delaying my own shift by doing this. I had said the part about meeting the mysterious Faravator soon and confronting her together to calm Kyung down, but as fate would have it, it was my turn to run into bad luck on the very shift after my chat with Kyung. Strange, what day is it today? I muttered to myself under my breath as I drove along the deserted main street of the strangely quiet city. Not a single person walking on the sidewalks, not to mention any passengers. My voice trailed off as my headlights illuminated a human-like figure doing a familiar slow wave of her hand at the intersection up ahead. Instinctively, I glanced at the glowing green digits on the dashboard clock. 0:04. I hesitated for just a split second before slamming on the brakes. After 3 nerve-wracking rings, Kyung finally picked up the phone. Yes? I should probably touch wood, but I think I found the lady you're looking for. The next moment, there was the sound of tires screeching in the background. Where are you? You pick her up and I'll tell you. Drive straight to the police post if she gives you any trouble, got it? I relayed my location to him, and keeping him on the call with his voice muted, I slowly inched towards the waiting passenger. No wonder Kyung described her as a pretty girl. That was my first impression as I stopped the car and rolled down the passenger side window. Soft, hazel-colored hair that fell in silky waves down slender shoulders. A pair of dark brown, almost black eyes met mine with the faintest of smiles that made my heart flutter. Miss, where are you headed? I asked, my throat suddenly feeling a lot drier than usual. Her unblinking eyes stared back at me silently. Then, without warning, she opened the passenger rear door and sat on the back seat in a smooth motion. "The Temple," she said in a voice bordering on whisper. "Okay." I shot a glance at my phone, making sure that my call with Kyung was still connected. At the very least, the temple wasn't far from the main street, and though I wasn't really the superstitious type, I was definitely relieved to be staying in the city instead of driving to the cemetery on the outskirts of town. "Sorry, but can you go straight instead?" Her whispery voice startled me. "Straight?" I looked at the approaching intersection. "But miss, I have to make a U-turn to go to the temple." "I've changed my mind. Please, go straight." I gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Miss, I'm telling you that." It was as if I had abruptly lost control of the car at that moment. I blinked in surprise, and the next thing I knew, we were already past the intersection and driving out of the town center. Barely able to register what had just happened, I frantically glanced at the rearview mirror and stared right into the lady's unmoving eyes. "And miss, we have to turn back." "Please, go straight," she repeated, her pale lips hardly moving as she spoke. A shiver ran down my spine, and to my fright, my foot stomped on the gas without warning. We flew past the next few intersections, all of them turning green in my favor eerily at the same time. Within less than a minute, we were reaching the T-junction at the end of the road, and the sign for the highway appeared in the fast-nearing distance. "Miss," I managed to utter in between panicked gasps as I looked at the rearview mirror again. We can't go straight any further." She didn't reply, but her head was twisted to the right as if she was craning her neck to catch a glimpse of something along the highway running perpendicular to the road. "I guess we're turning all right, then." An invisible pressure pressing upon my body released its chokehold at that moment, and somehow I was able to control the steering wheel and brake just enough to make a wide right turn onto the highway. "Driver," the lady's voice spoke into my ear all of a sudden. "What the?" I had flinched, and the car nearly drove over the median before I wrestled control over the steering wheel again. She gave me a look of disapproval, of all things. "When you see a fallen telephone pole along the road, please pull over and stop the car immediately," she continued, her voice fading to a bare whisper. "I'm counting on you to find." "Miss?" "Sorry, I couldn't catch what you..." I glanced up at the rearview mirror one last time, and just as Kyung had described, the lady was gone without a trace. One hand gripping the steering wheel tightly, I quickly unmuted the call on my phone. "Kyung, did you catch that?" "Catch what?" he shouted back. All I could hear for the past 5 minutes was static. "Where are you now?" It looks like I'm on the highway heading towards Kwamizang." "The highway?" "Yeah, wait a minute." Catching sight of a telephone pole which had collapsed into a ditch by the roadside, I quickly switched on my hazard lights and pulled over. This far out from the city, there were no street lights along the road, so I had to rely on my car headlights and the screen of my phone to navigate my way to the edge of the ditch. What's that on the ground? I froze as the light from my phone shone upon a smashed car bumper. Kyung, can you hear me? What's wrong? We need to call the police.